Alright, so what is up guys? In the previous session we learned about the mouse object as well as certain events of the mouse object such as move, idle, mouse button 1 up, mouse button 2 down and whatsoever. We also learned certain properties of the mouse such as mouse.target, mouse.hit and etc. So in this session we're going to be understanding how to get the user input, or let's say the keyboard input or the touchscreen input from a mobile or a PC player. In order to get that, I've written 3 questions here. So the service we'll be using today is user input service, and the 3 questions is what is user input service, how do we use user input service, and where do we use user input service. So basically, what is user input service? User input service is a type of service which is used to get the input of a player, which is from their keyboard or their touchscreen, that is a mobile player. And in order to use it, we'll be using a variable called as user input service, and the data we'll be assigning is game get service user input service. And there's certain events or most popularized events used from this service is input began and alright, so here I've written a really small script using the 2 events input began and input ended of the user input service, and 2 arguments of the input began and input ended is input and game process event. So if I were to hold up all of these or just click put my mouse here, it says up here, it says connect function input object game processed event boolean. So what it's trying to tell us is that this game process event, the data type of this game process event is a boolean, and this input is basically the object created when an input begins that describes a particular user input. So what it's trying to say is that let's say I click R on my keyboard, and that R is being assigned to this variable called input. And in order to check that, I'll be using if input.keycode equals enum.keycode.r. So what this enum is, actually it's a set of lists that is pre-described in your Roblox Studio, and inside of this enum there's something called as keycode, and inside of the keycode there are several inputs or user inputs such as R, ABC, space, or numpad up and whatsoever. And here I've just used the R, and in the print statement I've used print R is being pressed. Alright, so above this if statement or this conditional statement, you can see that I've written another conditional statement which involves game process event, which is the second argument of this game process event. And if you can recall, it says that game process event is a boolean. Alright, so the game process event, it checks if you're already like hold R, it says R is being pressed. If I release R, it says R has been released. But if I'm chatting and I hold R, let's say like this, it won't come in the output that I'm pressing R or R has been released. So that was basically the main point about game process event. Game process event is true, or the variable has the data true when a player clicks any GUI button on the screen or when they're chatting. And if they're chatting, in the script I've written if game process event equals true, then return. So basically it stops this whole thing. But if you don't write this, and if I were to omit this and remove it from my screen, you can see here that if I were to run this again, and if I don't chat and I press R, it says R is being pressed, and if I release, it says R has been released. But one thing to notice is that if I chat, if I hold R, it says R is being pressed and R has been released. So kindly keep in mind about this game process event. Whenever you're using the user input service, make sure to use this game process event and uses return keyword as well as this conditional statement. So as you can see here that I've written KeyCode and UserInputType. There's another thing called as input.UserInputType. And what this UserInputType does is that it checks, you can use it for like mouse inputs, and let's say a mouse button 1, the left mouse button. There is another way to use UserInputType, but the main difference is that you can check if a mobile player is holding the screen or not, and enum.mouse UserInputType.touch, and this tells us that the mobile player is touching the screen. Not be running the game, by the way. You should stop the game, test, device emulator, and you get this list of devices. So I just chose Samsung Galaxy A51. If I click on this and then run it, my whole Roblox Studio changes into the mobile. And if I move like this, it says touching the screen, jump, touching the screen, and whatsoever. But as you can see here that if I touch here, it says touching the screen. oh, I need to change the print statement, which is, so stop touching the screen. I forgot to change the print statement. And if I were to go front, it says touching the screen, and if I click on this, it doesn't say anything. So it's a homework question for you guys. Why does it not say touching the screen if I'm clicking on this jump button and I'm actually touching the screen? So that's a homework question for you guys. Kindly comment down if you guys know the answer to that. But if I touch here, it says touching the screen, and if I stop touching, it says stop touching the screen. That was basically it about user input service and the difference between key code and user input type. If you guys have any doubts, queries, questions, or whatsoever, kindly comment down. Till then, stay safe. Bye bye.